The mop bucket wheels squeaked across the polished concrete floor of Hangar Delta at Luke Air Force Base as Maria Rodriguez pushed it toward the towering F-16 Fighting Falcons that dominated the cavernous space. At 3:47 a.m., the Arizona desert air was cool and still, and the hangar was empty except for the sleeping jets and the woman who had been cleaning around them for the past 4 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria wore the standard-issue gray coveralls of Apex Facility Services, her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, safety glasses hanging from a lanyard around her neck. To anyone watching, she was just another member of the night cleaning crew, invisible and unremarkable as she went about her methodical work. The name tag on her cover read M. Rodriguez, Custodial Services, and that's exactly how everyone at Luke AFB knew her. What they didn't know was that Maria Rodriguez could fly every aircraft in that hangar better than most of the pilots who were assigned to them. She moved with unusual precision around the fighter jets, her cleaning routine revealing an intimate knowledge of aircraft that went far beyond what any janitor should possess. When she wiped down the F-16's canopy, her hands traced the exact spots where pilots would check for stress fractures. As she mopped beneath the landing gear, her eyes automatically assessed tire wear patterns and hydraulic fluid levels. Most telling of all, when she cleaned around the engine intake, she instinctively positioned herself to avoid the danger zones where jet blast could be lethal. The other cleaning crew members had long ago stopped questioning Maria's thoroughness. While they rushed through their assigned areas, eager to finish their shifts and go home, Maria took her time with each aircraft. She seemed to genuinely care about the condition of the jets, often reporting maintenance issues to the day shift supervisors who had learned to trust her observations. For a custodian, she had an uncanny ability to spot problems that sometimes escaped the trained eyes of the maintenance technicians. "Rodriguez, you're in early again," called out James Patterson, the crew supervisor, as he entered the hangar carrying his clipboard and the night's work assignments. Patterson was a retired Air Force sergeant who had taken the civilian job to supplement his pension, and he ran the cleaning operation with military efficiency. At 62, he was old enough to have seen plenty of dedicated workers, but Maria's commitment to her job puzzled him. "Couldn't sleep," Maria replied, wringing out her mop in the bucket. "Figured I'd get a head start on the jets." Patterson nodded, making notes on his clipboard. In 4 years, Maria had never called in sick, never complained about overtime, and never cut corners on her work. She was the kind of employee every supervisor dreamed of having, reliable and thorough to a fault. But there was something about the way she moved around the aircraft that nagged at him. A familiarity that seemed out of place for someone whose job was supposed to be cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. "You know," Patterson said, watching as Maria carefully cleaned around a complex piece of avionics equipment, "you handle yourself around these birds like you've been around military aircraft before. Ever serve?" Maria paused in her work, a brief hesitation that most people wouldn't have noticed. "Army," she said simply. "Supply Corps. Nothing exciting." It was the same answer she gave whenever anyone asked about her background, and like all her answers, it was technically true while being completely misleading. Maria had indeed served in the Army, but for exactly 6 months during her initial military career before transferring to the Navy and ultimately to the most elite flying squadron in the world. The truth was that Maria Rodriguez had once been Lieutenant Commander Maria Viper Rodriguez, the first Latina pilot ever selected for the Blue Angels, the Navy's precision aerobatic demonstration team. For 3 years, she had flown the iconic blue and gold F/A-18 Hornets in death-defying formations at air shows across the country, thrilling millions of spectators with displays of flying skill that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits. But that was a lifetime ago, buried beneath years of deliberately mundane civilian work and carefully constructed anonymity. The woman who had once pulled 7.5 Gs while flying, inverted just 18 inches away from her wingman's aircraft, now spent her nights mopping hangar floors and emptying waste baskets, invisible to the Air Force personnel who hurried past her without a second glance. The transformation hadn't been voluntary. Maria's fall from the pinnacle of military aviation to the bottom of the civilian workforce had been swift, brutal, and completely beyond her control. But she had learned to find a strange peace in the quiet anonymity of her custodial work. There were no performance evaluations, no politics, no media attention, just the simple satisfaction of keeping the hangars clean and maintaining her tenuous connection to the aircraft, that had once been her life. As Patterson continued his rounds, Maria returned to her methodical cleaning routine. She had developed a system over the years that allowed her to work efficiently while satisfying her need to stay close to the jets. Each aircraft received the same careful attention, but Maria always saved Hangar Delta's F-16s for last. These particular fighters were assigned to the 56th Fighter Wing's Aggressor Squadron, pilots who flew in simulated combat exercises against other Air Force units. Maria had studied their mission profiles and flight schedules with the dedication of someone who understood the critical importance of aircraft readiness. She knew which jets were scheduled for early morning sorties and made sure they received extra attention during her cleaning rounds. She had memorized the tail numbers of aircraft with recurring maintenance issues and always checked them carefully for new problems that might have developed during their previous flights. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now spent her time caring for aircraft flown by pilots who would never achieve the level of precision and skill she had once possessed. The aggressor pilots were good, she could tell from observing their pre-flight routines and post-flight inspections, but they flew with the mechanical competence of well-trained professionals, rather than the artistic mastery that had defined the Blue Angels. At 4:30 a.m., as Maria finished cleaning the last F-16 in the hangar, she allowed herself a moment of weakness. Looking up at the fighter's sleek profile, she could almost feel the phantom sensation of climbing into the cockpit, strapping herself into the ejection seat, and transforming from invisible custodian back into one of the most skilled pilots in the world. The muscle memory was still there, carefully preserved despite years of disuse, waiting for an opportunity that would never come. The sound of voices approaching the hangar entrance broke her reverie. The day shift maintenance crews would be arriving soon, followed by the pilots who would take these jets into the desert sky for another day of training exercises. Maria quickly finished her work and began gathering her cleaning supplies, preparing to fade back into invisibility as the hangar came alive with the purposeful activity of military aviation. As she wheeled her mop bucket toward the storage closet, Maria passed beneath the wing of the F-16 she had just finished cleaning. For just a moment, she reached up and touched the aircraft's skin, feeling the smooth aluminum that had been forged into one of the most capable fighting machines ever built. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, like someone saying goodbye to an old friend. By 5 a.m., Maria Rodriguez had clocked out and was walking across the parking lot toward her aging Honda Civic, just another member of the invisible army of custodial workers who kept the base functioning. Behind her, the hangar was already beginning to buzz with activity, as the real business of military aviation prepared to begin another day. The jets she had cleaned with such care would soon be screaming across the Arizona desert, piloted by men and women who had no idea that the woman who mopped their hangar floors had once flown with a precision and grace that few of them would ever achieve. Maria drove home through the desert dawn, past the small apartment complex where she had lived anonymously for 4 years, past the strip malls and chain restaurants that defined the civilian world beyond the base gates. In her rearview mirror, she could see the first F-16s of the day taking off from Luke AFB, climbing into the morning sky with a thunder that she felt in her bones. Once, she had been part of that thunder. Now she was just a woman driving home from the night shift, carrying secrets that would die with her, unless something extraordinary happened to bring them to light. The apartment Maria Rodriguez called home was a study in deliberate simplicity. Located in Desert Springs, a modest complex 15 minutes from Luke Air Force Base, her one-bedroom unit contained the bare minimum of furniture and decoration needed for basic living. The walls were painted contractor-grade beige and remained largely bare, except for a single framed photograph of her parents standing in front of their restaurant in East Los Angeles. What the apartment lacked in personality, it made up for in careful organization. Maria's belongings were arranged with military precision, from the spotless kitchen where every utensil had its designated place, to the bedroom where her civilian clothes hung in perfect alignment. It was the home of someone who had learned to live without attachments, someone prepared to disappear at a moment's notice if circumstances required it. But hidden in the bedroom closet, behind winter coats that rarely saw use in the Arizona desert, was a locked metal footlocker that contained the only remnants of Maria's previous life. Inside, carefully wrapped in acid-free tissue paper, were items that told a story of extraordinary achievement and devastating loss. The Blue Angels flight suit bore her name and call sign embroidered in gold thread, LCDRM Rodriguez Viper. The deep blue fabric was still pristine, having been worn only during official ceremonies and photo shoots. Beside it lay her flight helmet, its white surface decorated with the distinctive Blue Angels logo and her personal artwork, a striking Viper's head that had become her signature during her time with the demonstration team. The collection of mission patches told the story of a career that had defied every statistical probability. Naval Academy graduate, top of her flight training class, carrier qualified on both the F/A-18 Hornet and Super Hornet, combat deployment to the Persian Gulf, and finally selection for the most prestigious flying assignment in military aviation. Each patch represented months or years of dedication, sacrifice, and achievement that few pilots ever experienced. At the bottom of the footlocker, wrapped in a black velvet cloth, was Maria's most treasured possession, the Blue Angels Diamond 360 pin. Only pilots who had successfully completed the team's most challenging maneuver, a 4-aircraft diamond formation, performing a complete 360-degree loop, were authorized to wear the distinctive pin. Maria had earned hers during her second season with the team, executing the maneuver with a precision that had impressed even the veteran Blue Angels pilots who had been performing it for years. The photograph albums contained images from a life that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Maria in her dress blues receiving the Navy Cross for heroism during a combat mission over Syria. Maria stood beside her F/A-18 on the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln during a deployment that had tested every aspect of her flying skills. Maria with her Blue Angels teammates after completing a perfect performance at the Pensacola Beach Air Show, their faces reflecting the exhaustion and exhilaration that came from flying at the edge of human capability. But it was the final album that contained the most painful memories. The investigation hearings, the media scrutiny, the gradual unraveling of everything she had worked to achieve. The photographs from that period showed a woman under siege, her face drawn with stress as she navigated accusations that would ultimately destroy her career and force her into the anonymous existence she now maintained. The incident that ended Maria's flying career had begun as a routine Blue Angels demonstration at the Miramar Air Show in San Diego. The team was performing their signature Diamond 360 maneuver when a mechanical failure in the No. 4 aircraft created a cascade of problems that threatened not just the pilot but potentially thousands of spectators on the ground below. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lieutenant Commander Jake Mitchell, flying as the slot pilot in the No. 4 position, had experienced a complete hydraulic failure that left him with minimal control authority. Standard procedure called for him to break formation and attempt an emergency landing at the nearest suitable airfield, but his aircraft was positioned directly over the crowded spectator area with insufficient altitude to maneuver safely away from populated areas. Maria, flying as the lead pilot in the Diamond formation, had seconds to make a decision that would save or doom thousands of people. The prescribed emergency procedure was clear: maintain formation separation and allow the disabled aircraft to follow its own emergency protocols. But Maria could see that Mitchell's F/A-18 was going to crash directly into the packed grandstands unless someone intervened immediately. Without requesting permission or following established procedures, Maria broke formation and positioned her aircraft beneath Mitchell's failing Hornet. Using a technique that existed only in theoretical discussions among test pilots, she flew inverted below the disabled aircraft and used her own jet's wake turbulence and proximity effects to gradually alter its flight path away from the spectators and toward the empty desert beyond the airfield. The maneuver required flying at tolerances that exceeded every safety margin in the Blue Angels operations manual. Maria maintained formation with the out-of-control aircraft for nearly 4 minutes, using minute adjustments in her flight path to nudge the disabled Hornet away from populated areas, while Mitchell fought to maintain basic aircraft control. When his aircraft finally crashed, it impacted harmlessly in empty desert terrain 2 miles from the nearest spectators. The investigation board acknowledged that Maria's actions had almost certainly saved hundreds of lives. The crowd in the grandstands, estimated at over 12,000 people, had been directly beneath Mitchell's flight path when the hydraulic failure occurred. Without Maria's intervention, his aircraft would have crashed into the packed seating area with catastrophic results. But the board also concluded that Maria had violated multiple regulations by breaking formation without authorization and performing an unauthorized maneuver that put her own aircraft and pilot at extreme risk. The technique she had used was not part of any approved emergency procedure, and her decision to attempt it without consulting her commanding officer represented a serious breach of military protocol and chain of command. The media coverage of the incident focused initially on Maria's heroism and the lives she had saved. Aviation experts praised her skill and quick thinking, while the families of potential victims called her a hero who had risked her own life to protect innocent civilians. For several weeks, Maria found herself celebrated as an example of military professionalism and courage under pressure. But the narrative shifted dramatically when details of the investigation began to leak to the press. Critics within the military establishment argued that Maria's actions, however well-intentioned, represented a dangerous precedent that could undermine military discipline and command authority. They pointed out that her decision to break formation had put her own life at risk and could have resulted in 2 aircraft crashes instead of 1. The controversy intensified when it was revealed that Maria had attempted a similar maneuver during training exercises 2 years earlier, an incident that had resulted in a formal reprimand and additional training requirements. The earlier incident had involved a simulated emergency during a practice session, and Maria's commanding officer had specifically instructed her never to attempt such maneuvers without explicit authorization. Admiral Patricia Hawkins, the officer responsible for the Blue Angels program, found herself caught between competing pressures from various factions within the Navy hierarchy. Some senior officers viewed Maria as a loose cannon, whose disregard for procedures made her unsuitable for the precision flying required by the demonstration team. Others argued that her innovative thinking and exceptional piloting skills were exactly the qualities the Navy should encourage and reward. The final blow came when congressional investigators began questioning the cost and safety of the entire Blue Angels program. Using Maria's case as evidence of inadequate oversight and dangerous practices, they argued that the demonstration team represented an unnecessary risk to public safety and an inappropriate use of military resources. The political pressure to reform or eliminate the program became intense enough to threaten its continued existence. Faced with the possibility of congressional intervention that could shut down the Blue Angels entirely, Admiral Hawkins made the decision to remove Maria from the team and recommend her transfer to a non-flying assignment. The official reason cited divergent operational philosophies and incompatibility with demonstration team requirements, language that protected both Maria's military record and the Blue Angels program from further congressional scrutiny. Maria was reassigned to a staff position at the Pentagon, where she spent 18 months pushing papers and attending meetings while her flying skills atrophied from disuse. The work was mind-numbing and professionally devastating for someone who had spent her entire adult life in cockpits and ready rooms. She found herself surrounded by career officers who viewed her as a cautionary tale about the dangers of independent thinking in military aviation. The psychological toll of the transition was severe. Maria had defined herself entirely through her identity as a pilot, and particularly as a Blue Angels pilot. Without the daily routine of briefings, flights, and debriefings that had structured her life for over a decade, she felt adrift and purposeless. The Washington assignment offered none of the camaraderie or sense of mission that had sustained her through years of dangerous flying. More damaging was the gradual realization that her flying career was effectively over. The controversy surrounding her Blue Angels departure had made her toxic to other flying assignments within the Navy. Squadron commanders were reluctant to accept a pilot who had been removed from the service's most prestigious flying unit. Regardless of the circumstances, Maria found herself stuck in administrative roles that made no use of her exceptional flying abilities. The breaking point came during a particularly pointless staff meeting about budget allocations for military family housing. As Maria sat listening to bureaucrats debate funding formulas that had no connection to military readiness or operational capability, she realized that she could no longer tolerate the disconnection from the work that had given her life meaning. That evening, Maria submitted her resignation from the Navy, ending a career that had taken her from the projects of East Los Angeles to the pinnacle of military aviation achievement. Her commanding officer accepted the resignation without attempting to change her mind, apparently relieved to resolve a personnel situation that had become politically complicated. The transition to civilian life was brutal and disorienting. Maria's entire adult identity had been built around military service and flying, and she found herself completely unprepared for the job market outside the armed forces. Her flying qualifications were impressive but largely non-transferable to civilian aviation, which operated under different regulations and priorities than military aviation. The commercial airlines were downsizing in response to economic pressures and had no interest in hiring former military pilots without extensive civilian experience. Corporate aviation positions required connections and references that Maria couldn't provide without revealing the circumstances of her departure from the Navy. Flight instruction work was available, but paid poorly and offered none of the challenge or satisfaction she had found in military aviation. Eventually, desperate for income and stability, Maria had answered an advertisement for custodial positions at Luke Air Force Base. The work paid enough to cover her basic living expenses and offered the only benefit she truly cared about: daily proximity to military aircraft and the opportunity to remain connected, however peripherally, to the world of military aviation. Apex Facility Services had hired her without extensive background checks, satisfied with her honorable discharge documentation, and impressed by her punctuality and work ethic. Her supervisor knew she was a veteran, but had no idea that the woman emptying trash cans in the fighter squadron ready rooms had once been one of the most skilled pilots in the United States military. 4 years later, Maria had successfully created a new identity as a dedicated but unremarkable custodial worker. She had learned to find satisfaction in maintaining the cleanliness and order of the facilities where younger pilots prepared for missions that she would never fly again. The work was honest and necessary, even if it made no use of the skills that had once defined her life. But every night, as she moved through the hangars cleaning around aircraft that she could fly better than their assigned pilots, Maria felt the weight of unfulfilled potential and the constant ache of dreams that had been sacrificed on the altar of military politics and bureaucratic convenience. She had learned to live with the loss, but she had never learned to accept it. The trouble began with Colonel Richard Brennan's arrival at Luke Air Force Base in September. Brennan had been brought in as the new base operations commander, with a mandate to modernize efficiency protocols and reduce what Pentagon auditors had identified as excessive operational costs. At 55, he carried himself with the rigid bearing of an officer who had built his career on following regulations and eliminating what he viewed as unnecessary variables in military operations. Brennan's background was in logistics and administration rather than flying operations, and he approached his new assignment with the mindset of a corporate efficiency expert rather than a military aviation professional. His first initiative involved comprehensive reviews of all base contracts and service providers, with particular attention to areas where costs had increased without corresponding improvements in measurable outcomes. Maria first encountered Brennan during a routine inspection of Hangar Delta that occurred during her normal cleaning shift. She was methodically working around an F-16 when she noticed a group of officers conducting what appeared to be a detailed facility assessment. Brennan stood at the center of the group, clipboard in hand, making notes while asking pointed questions about maintenance schedules and facility utilization. This hangar appears to be receiving significantly more cleaning attention than standard protocols require, Brennan observed, watching Maria carefully clean around the aircraft's complex avionics bay. The current contract specifications call for basic custodial services, not detailed aircraft maintenance support. Master Sergeant Frank Morrison, the hangar's senior NCO, defended the existing arrangements. "Rodriguez is thorough, sir. She's caught maintenance issues that our day shift techs missed. Her attention to detail has prevented several potential problems." Brennan made additional notes, his expression suggesting skepticism rather than appreciation. "Maintenance oversight is the responsibility of trained personnel, not custodial staff. We need to ensure that contractors stay within their designated scope of work and don't exceed their authorized responsibilities." The exchange marked the beginning of systematic changes that would gradually strip away the small freedoms and professional satisfactions that Maria had found in her custodial work. Brennan's efficiency reviews identified what he termed scope creep in the cleaning contracts, situations where custodial staff had taken on responsibilities that weren't explicitly outlined in their service agreements. Within 2 weeks of Brennan's inspection, Apex Facility Services received new operational guidelines that restricted custodial staff access to aircraft and limited their interaction with maintenance personnel. The revised protocol specified exact cleaning procedures and time allocations for each task, eliminating the discretionary judgment that had allowed Maria to provide the thorough attention she believed the aircraft deserved. James Patterson called a staff meeting to explain the new requirements. "Effective immediately, we're implementing standardized cleaning protocols for all hangar operations," he announced to the assembled night shift crew. Each aircraft cleaning assignment has been allocated specific time limits, and we're required to complete our work without exceeding those parameters. Maria studied the new guidelines with growing concern. The allocated time for cleaning around each F-16 had been reduced from her typical 45 minutes to exactly 22 minutes, barely enough time for the superficial cleaning that would satisfy a casual inspection. The detailed attention she had been providing to critical aircraft systems would no longer be possible under the new efficiency standards. More troubling were the restrictions on reporting maintenance issues. The new protocols required all maintenance observations to be submitted through formal channels, with documentation and supervisory approval required before any concerns could be forwarded to the appropriate maintenance personnel. The informal communication that had allowed Maria to quickly alert technicians about potential problems had been eliminated in favor of bureaucratic procedures that prioritized documentation over immediate action. "This is going to be a problem," Maria said to Patterson after the meeting. "Some of these aircraft develop issues between scheduled maintenance cycles. If we can't report problems immediately, safety concerns might go unaddressed for days or weeks." Patterson shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the new requirements but unwilling to challenge orders from above. "That's not our responsibility anymore, Rodriguez. Our job is to clean floors and empty trash, nothing more. The Air Force has their own people to worry about aircraft safety." The first test of the new protocols came 3 days later when Maria discovered hydraulic fluid leaking from an F-16's landing gear assembly during her cleaning routine. Under the previous arrangements, she would have immediately notified the day-shift maintenance supervisor, who would have grounded the aircraft pending inspection and repair. But the new procedures required her to document the observation, submit it through Patterson, and wait for supervisory review before any action could be taken. Maria followed the new protocols exactly, photographing the leak with her personal phone and completing the required incident report form. She submitted the documentation to Patterson, who promised to forward it through proper channels when the administrative office opened the following morning. The aircraft remained on the flight schedule for early morning training missions, its potential hydraulic problem unreported to the maintenance personnel who could address it. The hydraulic leak was eventually discovered during a routine pre-flight inspection 6 hours later, but not before the aircraft had been moved and repositioned several times, spreading hydraulic fluid across the hangar floor and creating a safety hazard for personnel and equipment. The maintenance crew spent most of the morning cleaning up the contamination and conducting detailed inspections to ensure that other aircraft hadn't been affected. When Master Sergeant Morrison learned about the delayed reporting, he confronted Patterson about the incident. "Why wasn't this leak reported immediately?" Morrison demanded. "Your cleaning crew was working around that aircraft all night. Someone had to have noticed the problem." Patterson explained the new reporting procedures, emphasizing that his staff was following the protocols exactly as specified by Colonel Brennan's office. "We documented everything properly and submitted the report through appropriate channels," he said defensively. "The system worked exactly as designed." But Morrison wasn't satisfied with the bureaucratic explanation. "The system failed," he said bluntly. "We had an aircraft with a potentially dangerous mechanical problem sitting on the flight line for 6 hours because nobody could pick up a phone and call the maintenance desk. That's not efficiency, that's stupidity." The incident report eventually reached Colonel Brennan's office, where it became the subject of additional procedural reviews and policy clarifications. Rather than recognizing the safety implications of delayed reporting, Brennan focused on what he viewed as the maintenance crew's failure to conduct adequate pre-flight inspections that should have caught the problem earlier. Maria watched the aftermath of the hydraulic leak incident with growing frustration and a familiar sense of institutional dysfunction. Once again, she found herself in a system where following procedures was more important than achieving results, where covering bureaucratic responsibilities took precedence over addressing actual problems that affected safety and operational effectiveness. The situation deteriorated further when Brennan implemented what he called performance optimization metrics for the custodial contracts. Apex Facility Services was now required to track and report detailed productivity statistics for each employee, including time spent per cleaning task, number of facilities serviced per shift, and measurable outcomes such as inspection scores and customer satisfaction ratings. Maria's detailed approach to aircraft cleaning made her a statistical outlier in the new performance measurement system. While her colleagues completed their assigned tasks quickly and moved on to the next facility, Maria continued to spend additional time ensuring that critical aircraft systems received proper attention. Her productivity numbers appeared lower than her peers, even though the quality of her work remained consistently superior. The performance reviews created additional problems when Patricia Valdez joined Apex Facility Services as a regional supervisor tasked with implementing Brennan's efficiency initiatives. Valdez was a recent business school graduate who had been hired specifically to apply corporate management techniques to government service contracts. She approached the custodial operations with the analytical mindset of someone who viewed human workers as variables in a larger optimization equation. Rodriguez, Valdez said during her first individual performance review with Maria, "Your productivity metrics are concerning. You're consistently spending more time per task than contract specifications allow, and your facility completion rates are below team averages. We need to discuss strategies for improving your efficiency." Maria attempted to explain the complexity of her aircraft cleaning responsibilities and the importance of thorough inspection procedures, but Valdez seemed uninterested in operational details that couldn't be quantified in her spreadsheets. "The contract specifies exact time allocations for each cleaning task," Valdez replied. "Our job is to meet those specifications efficiently, not to exceed them based on personal preferences or unofficial procedures." The performance improvement plan that Valdez developed for Maria included mandatory time tracking, supervisory observation sessions, and weekly productivity assessments designed to bring her performance metrics in line with team standards. Maria would be required to use a digital timer for each cleaning task and submit detailed reports explaining any deviations from allocated time schedules. More humiliating was the requirement for direct supervision during her cleaning duties. Valdez would periodically observe Maria's work, timing her procedures and providing coaching on more efficient cleaning techniques that prioritized speed over thoroughness. The supervision sessions felt like professional harassment, designed to force Maria to abandon the careful attention to detail that had made her valuable to the maintenance crews. "You're spending too much time on this avionics bay," Valdez observed during one particularly frustrating supervision session. "The contract calls for basic exterior cleaning, not detailed inspection of electronic components. You need to focus on visible surfaces and move on to the next aircraft." Maria felt her patience reaching its breaking point. Those electronic components cost millions of dollars and are critical to flight safety. "If I notice something unusual, shouldn't I at least document it?" "Documentation is the responsibility of qualified maintenance personnel," Valdez replied, echoing the same bureaucratic language that Maria had been hearing for weeks. "Your job is custodial services, nothing more. We need to stay within our designated scope of work." The systematic undermining of Maria's professional autonomy accelerated when Colonel Brennan discovered that she had been providing informal consultation to younger pilots who sought her advice about aircraft systems and flight procedures. The conversations typically occurred during shift changes when pilots arrived early for briefings and noticed Maria's unusually knowledgeable approach to aircraft maintenance. Lieutenant Danny Walsh, a recent flight school graduate assigned to his first operational squadron, had begun asking Maria questions about F-16 systems after observing her detailed familiarity with the aircraft. "You seem to know these jets really well," Walsh had commented. "Did you do maintenance before this job?" Maria had been careful to provide only general information, drawing on her extensive flight experience while avoiding specifics that might reveal her true background. But the informal mentoring relationship had been noticed by other personnel, including staff officers who reported the inappropriate interaction between custodial staff and flight crews to Colonel Brennan's office. The resulting investigation focused on what Brennan's staff termed unauthorized technical consultation by unqualified personnel. Maria was formally reprimanded for exceeding her job responsibilities and providing aircraft information to military personnel without proper credentials or authorization. The reprimand included a written warning that future violations could result in termination of her employment. The investigation also resulted in new restrictions that prohibited custodial staff from engaging in conversations with flight crews beyond basic courtesy exchanges. Maria was specifically instructed to avoid discussions about aircraft systems, flight procedures, or any technical topics related to military aviation. Her supervisor was required to monitor her interactions with base personnel and report any violations of the communication restrictions. The final escalation came when Maria discovered a potentially serious problem with an F-16's ejection seat safety system during her cleaning routine. The seat's safety pins appeared to be improperly installed, a condition that could prevent the ejection system from functioning correctly in an emergency. Under normal circumstances, Such a discovery would require immediate notification of maintenance personnel and grounding of the aircraft until the problem could be addressed. Honograph. But the new protocols required Maria to document the observation and submit it through multiple layers of bureaucratic review before any action could be taken. She took photographs of the safety pin configuration and completed the required incident reports. But the aircraft remained on the flight schedule for morning training missions while her report worked its way through the administrative system. The ejection seat problem was eventually discovered during a routine inspection 2 days later, but only after the aircraft had flown several training missions with a potentially deadly malfunction. The maintenance investigation revealed that the safety pins had indeed been improperly installed, creating a condition that could have killed the pilot if an ejection had been necessary. Master Sergeant Morrison was furious when he learned about the delayed reporting. This is the second time in 2 months that a serious safety issue went unreported because of these ridiculous procedures, he told Patterson. Someone is going to get killed because we're more worried about paperwork than aircraft safety. But Colonel Brennan's response to the incident focused on what he viewed as maintenance crew failures, rather than systemic problems with the reporting procedures. His investigation concluded that the ejection seat problem represented a breakdown in quality control by the maintenance personnel responsible for the aircraft, not a failure of the new efficiency protocols he'd implemented. Maria realized that she was trapped in a system designed to eliminate her ability to contribute meaningfully to aircraft safety and operational effectiveness. Every attempt to use her knowledge and experience to prevent problems was met with bureaucratic restrictions and administrative punishment. The work that had once provided a sense of purpose and professional satisfaction had been reduced to mindless task completion under constant surveillance and criticism. The systematic undermining had achieved its intended effect. Maria's exceptional abilities were being deliberately suppressed by institutional forces that viewed her competence as a threat to established procedures and command authority. She found herself reliving the same pattern of bureaucratic betrayal that had ended her military career, watching helplessly as safety concerns were subordinated to administrative convenience and political control. The ambush came disguised as a routine performance evaluation meeting scheduled for a gray February morning in Patricia Valdez's temporary office at the base administrative complex. Maria arrived punctually at 8 a.m., carrying the required documentation of her recent work assignments and productivity metrics, unaware that Colonel Brennan had orchestrated what would effectively serve as a professional execution. Valdez wasn't alone when Maria entered the sterile conference room. Seated beside her was Captain Jennifer Hayes from the base security office, a stern woman in her early 40s whose presence immediately signaled that this meeting involved more than standard employment issues. Dr. Michael Thornton, a civilian contractor who specialized in workplace psychology assessments, occupied the chair at the far end of the table, his briefcase open to reveal recording equipment and psychological evaluation forms. "Rodriguez, please take a seat," Valdez began, her tone noticeably more formal than during their previous interactions. "We've called this meeting to address several serious concerns that have emerged regarding your performance and conduct during your employment with Apex Facility Services." Maria settled into the designated chair, her military training automatically cataloging the defensive positioning of her interrogators and the calculated intimidation of the formal setup. She recognized the tactical arrangement from her own experience conducting security interviews during her Navy career, but being on the receiving end felt like a betrayal of everything she had once represented. Captain Hayes opened a thick folder and began reading from what appeared to be a comprehensive investigation report. "Over the past 6 months, we've documented multiple incidents where you've exceeded your authorized scope of work, provided unauthorized technical consultation to military personnel, and demonstrated pattern behavior that raises questions about your motivations and potential security risks." The accusations came in rapid succession, each one technically accurate but stripped of context in ways that transformed Maria's conscientious work into evidence of suspicious activity. Her careful attention to aircraft safety systems was characterized as unauthorized surveillance of military equipment. Her informal conversations with pilots were described as inappropriate intelligence gathering from operational personnel. Even her photography of maintenance issues, required by the new reporting procedures, was presented as, quote, undocumented collection of sensitive technical information. Furthermore, Hayes continued, consulting additional documents, background verification has revealed significant discrepancies in your employment application. You listed your military service as Army Supply Corps, but our investigation indicates that your actual service record is considerably more complex and includes assignments that weren't disclosed during your hiring process. Maria felt the familiar chill of institutional betrayal as she realized that someone had conducted a detailed investigation into her military background, uncovering the classified portions of her service record that she had legitimately omitted from her civilian employment application. The investigation had clearly been thorough and well-resourced, suggesting involvement from federal agencies with access to personnel files that should have remained sealed. Dr. Thornton leaned forward, his expression conveying the calculated sympathy of a professional interrogator. Maria, we're trying to understand the psychological motivations behind your behavior patterns. Your documented actions suggest someone who may be struggling with the transition from military service to civilian employment, possibly experiencing identity issues that manifest as attempts to recreate your previous professional role. The psychological assessment was devastating in its accuracy. Thornton had correctly identified Maria's underlying emotional struggles while framing them as evidence of mental instability rather than natural grief for a lost career. His questions probed her feelings about military service, her adjustment to civilian life, and her relationship with the aircraft she cleaned, all designed to build a case that she was psychologically unsuited for her current employment. It's not uncommon for former military personnel to experience difficulty accepting reduced responsibilities, Thornton continued, making notes as he spoke. Sometimes this manifests as boundary violations, attempts to assert expertise in areas outside their current authority, or obsessive focus on details that aren't relevant to their assigned duties. Maria realized that the evaluation was carefully constructed to pathologize her competence and dedication while ignoring the legitimate safety concerns that had motivated her actions. Every positive quality that had made her an exceptional pilot was being reframed as evidence of psychological dysfunction that made her unsuitable for even the most basic employment. Valdez produced a new document that outlined what she termed, quote, corrective action requirements, designed to address the identified performance and behavioral issues. The plan included mandatory psychological counseling, complete restriction from aircraft areas during cleaning duties, prohibition on any communication with military personnel beyond basic acknowledgement, and continuous supervisory monitoring during all work activities. These restrictions will remain in effect pending completion of your psychological evaluation and successful demonstration of improved compliance with established procedures, Valdez explained. Dr. Thornton will be conducting weekly assessment sessions to monitor your progress and determine your suitability for continued employment. The psychological counseling sessions began the following week in Dr. Thornton's office, a deliberately neutral space designed to encourage emotional vulnerability while maintaining professional distance. Thornton's approach was subtly manipulative, combining genuine therapeutic techniques with interrogation methods designed to extract information about Maria's true background and motivations. "Tell me about your relationship with aircraft," Thornton said during their first session. "Your supervisors have noted that you seem unusually attached to the planes you clean, spending more time around them than your job requires. What do these aircraft represent to you?" Maria recognized the trap in the question, but found herself caught between honesty and self-protection. Admitting her emotional connection to the aircraft would support Thornton's theory that she was psychologically unstable, but denying it would be obviously false given her documented behavior patterns. "I take pride in doing thorough work," Maria replied carefully. "These aircraft are expensive and important. I want to make sure they're properly maintained." Thornton made extensive notes, his questions gradually becoming more pointed as he probed for evidence of the identity issues he was determined to document. "But maintenance isn't your responsibility, Maria. Your job is custodial services. Don't you think your excessive focus on maintenance issues might indicate difficulty accepting your current role?" The sessions continued for weeks, each one building a psychological profile that painted Maria as a former military officer, struggling with reduced status and attempting to reclaim authority through inappropriate workplace behavior. Thornton's reports, which were shared with both Apex Facility Services and Base Security, recommended continued monitoring and possible termination if Maria couldn't demonstrate successful adjustment to her civilian role. Meanwhile, the workplace restrictions had made Maria's job virtually impossible to perform effectively. She was prohibited from working in any hangar that contained aircraft, limiting her assignments to administrative buildings, storage facilities, and maintenance shops. The work was mind-numbing and professionally meaningless, consisting entirely of basic janitorial tasks that required none of the skills or knowledge that had once defined her career. More humiliating was the constant supervision that accompanied her every movement on base. A rotating series of Apex Facility Services supervisors shadowed her throughout each shift, timing her tasks and documenting her interactions with base personnel. The supervision was presented as quality assurance, but Maria understood it was actually designed to build a comprehensive record of any behavior that could be used to justify her termination. The final phase of her professional destruction began when Colonel Brennan received an anonymous report alleging that Maria had been accessing restricted areas of the base during her off-duty hours. The report, which later investigation would prove to be completely fabricated, claimed that base security cameras had recorded Maria near the flight line and aircraft storage areas outside her normal work schedule. Captain Hayes launched an immediate investigation that included comprehensive review of security footage, interrogation of Maria's colleagues, and detailed analysis of her base access records. The investigation found no evidence to support the anonymous allegations, but the process itself became another weapon in the campaign to destroy Maria's reputation and employment. Even though we found no evidence of unauthorized access, Hayes explained during a formal interview, the allegations raise serious questions about your intentions and motivations. Someone felt compelled to report suspicious behavior, which suggests that your conduct has been noticed and misinterpreted by base personnel. The logic was circular and deliberately unfair. Maria was being held responsible for anonymous accusations that the investigation had proven false, but the existence of the accusations was being used as evidence that she had behaved suspiciously enough to warrant concern. The investigation process had become a form of punishment in itself, regardless of its eventual conclusions. The psychological evaluation sessions intensified as Dr. Thornton pressed for more detailed information about Maria's military background and current emotional state. His questions became increasingly invasive, probing her relationships, financial situation, and personal beliefs in ways that seemed designed to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited. "I'm concerned about your social isolation," Thornton said during one particularly difficult session. "You seem to have very few personal relationships and spend most of your time alone. Combined with your workplace issues, this suggests possible depression or other mental health conditions that could affect your judgment and behavior." Maria's carefully maintained privacy was being used against her as evidence of psychological dysfunction. Her deliberate choice to live quietly and avoid complications that might expose her true background was being pathologized as antisocial behavior that indicated unfitness for employment. The trap was closing systematically and inexorably. Every aspect of Maria's professional and personal life was being scrutinized and reframed as evidence of problems that justified increasingly severe restrictions and monitoring. The competence and dedication that had once made her valuable were now being used as proof that she was psychologically unsuited for even the most basic civilian employment. The final blow came when Valdez informed Maria that Apex Facility Services was terminating her employment effective immediately due to, quote, irreconcilable performance and behavioral issues that pose potential security and safety risks. The termination letter cited her failure to adapt to civilian workplace expectations, her inability to work effectively within established boundaries, and concerns about her psychological stability based on Dr. Thornton's evaluation. "I want you to understand that this decision isn't personal," Valdez said with obviously false sympathy. "We recognize that your military background created certain expectations and habits that may not translate well to civilian employment. Perhaps a different type of work environment would be more suitable for your particular needs and personality." The security escort that accompanied Maria as she cleaned out her locker was the final humiliation. Captain Hayes personally supervised the removal of her personal belongings, examining each item as if it might contain evidence of espionage or sabotage. The process was designed to maximize embarrassment and ensure that other base personnel witnessed her disgraceful departure. As Maria loaded her belongings into her car under the watchful eyes of security personnel, she reflected on the systematic destruction of her civilian career and the familiar pattern of institutional betrayal that had defined her adult life. Once again, her exceptional abilities had been viewed as threats by people in authority who valued compliance over competence and political safety over operational effectiveness. The drive away from Luke Air Force Base felt like the final severing of her connection to military aviation and the last hope of finding meaningful work in the field that had once been her life. At 43, she faced the prospect of starting over in a job market that wouldn't recognize her skills and qualifications, carrying the burden of an employment history that painted her as a problem employee unsuited for responsible positions. Maria Rodriguez, former Blue Angels pilot and one of the most skilled aviators in military history, was now unemployed and unemployable, destroyed not by enemy action or mechanical failure, but by the same bureaucratic machinery that had claimed her military career years earlier. The thunderstorm that would change everything began forming over the Sonoran Desert at 2:17 p.m. on a scorching August afternoon, 6 months after Maria Rodriguez had been escorted off Luke Air Force Base in professional disgrace. She was stocking shelves at Desert View Market, a small grocery store in Glendale, where she had found minimum wage employment after exhausting her savings and unemployment benefits. The work was mind-numbing and physically demanding, but it paid enough to cover her basic expenses and came without the security clearances or background checks that had made other employment impossible. Her manager, a kind woman named Susan Chen who had hired Maria despite her problematic employment history, appreciated her reliability and attention to detail, qualities that seemed exceptional in the high-turnover world of retail employment. Maria was arranging canned goods when the first emergency broadcast interrupted the store's background music. "This is a civil defense alert," the automated voice announced. "Severe weather conditions are developing rapidly across the Phoenix metropolitan area. All aircraft operations have been suspended due to extreme wind shear and lightning activity." The announcement was followed by increasingly urgent updates as the storm system intensified beyond all meteorological predictions. What had begun as a typical summer thunderstorm was rapidly evolving into a supercell complex, with winds exceeding 120 miles per hour and lightning strikes occurring every few seconds across a 50-mile radius. At Luke Air Force Base, the crisis was unfolding with devastating speed. The storm had caught a training flight of 6 F-16 Fighting Falcons on a routine navigation exercise over the desert, and the aircraft were now trapped in airspace where landing had become impossible due to the extreme weather conditions. Visibility was near zero, winds were gusting beyond the structural limits of the aircraft, and electromagnetic interference from continuous lightning strikes had disabled most electronic navigation systems. Flight leader Captain Rebecca Martinez was fighting to maintain control of her aircraft, while coordinating with the 5 pilots under her command, all of whom were struggling with similar control problems in the violent turbulence. Their fuel supplies were running critically low after nearly 2 hours of combat with the storm, and Luke Air Force Base remained closed to all aircraft operations due to the impossible landing conditions. "Phoenix approach, Viper flight," Martinez called over the radio, her voice strained with the effort of controlling her bucking aircraft. "We're down to 15 minutes of fuel and unable to reach any alternate airfields. Request immediate assistance for emergency recovery procedures." The response from Luke Air Force Base was devastating in its helplessness. "Viper flight, Luke Tower. All runways remain closed due to severe wind shear and zero visibility. We have no safe recovery options available at this time. Continue holding pattern and standby for further instructions." Colonel Brennan stood in the base operations center, surrounded by weather specialists and air traffic controllers who had run out of conventional solutions to an unprecedented crisis. The storm was too violent for any aircraft to safely penetrate, but the trapped F-16s couldn't remain airborne much longer. In less than 20 minutes, 6 of the Air Force's most advanced fighters would begin falling from the sky, taking their pilots with them. "Sir," called Major Sandra Kim from the weather station, "the storm system is actually intensifying rather than dissipating. We're seeing wind speeds that exceed anything in our historical records. This isn't going to clear up in time to save those aircraft." Brennan felt the weight of command responsibility crushing down on him as he realized that his efficiency protocols and cost-cutting measures had eliminated most of the emergency procedures that might have provided alternatives in this situation. The base's emergency response capabilities had been streamlined to handle routine problems, not catastrophic weather events that pushed every system beyond its design limits. "What about emergency landing strips?" Brennan asked desperately. "Military installations with protected runways?" "Negative, sir," replied Captain Torres from Air Traffic Control. "The storm covers everything within fuel range of those aircraft. Davis Monthan is reporting similar conditions, and civilian airports are completely shut down. There's nowhere for them to go. The crisis deepened when lightning strikes began affecting the F-16's electronic systems. Captain Martinez reported multiple equipment failures across her flight, including navigation computers, communication radios, and flight control systems that were being overwhelmed by electromagnetic interference. The pilots were flying essentially blind, using only basic instruments and limited radio contact to maintain formation and avoid collisions. Meanwhile, 30 miles away in Desert View Market, Maria Rodriguez was watching the emergency broadcasts with growing horror and professional recognition of what was happening to the trapped pilots. The news coverage showed radar images of the massive storm system and brief radio transmissions from the aircraft, but the civilian reporters had no understanding of the technical challenges facing the pilots or the limited options available for rescue. Maria's extensive experience with emergency aviation procedures allowed her to understand exactly what was happening and why conventional solutions were failing. The pilots were trapped in conditions that exceeded every safety parameter for normal flight operations, but they were too low on fuel to escape the storm system and reach clear airspace where landing might be possible. The critical insight came when Maria heard Captain Martinez's voice over the emergency radio frequency that the store's battery-powered radio had picked up during the electrical interference. The transmission was broken and distorted, but Maria's trained ear caught something that the base controllers had missed in the chaos of multiple emergency communications. Attempting formation recovery, visual contact with ground reference, following interstate corridor toward possible emergency landing site. Maria realized that the pilots were trying to navigate using visual ground references, following major highways and landmarks toward what they hoped might be emergency landing options. But the news reports made it clear that all major airports and military installations were closed due to the storm conditions. However, Maria knew something that the pilots and base controllers might not have considered. Interstate 10, the major highway running east-west through the desert, included several sections of perfectly straight, wide roadway that had been designed with military emergency landing capabilities during the Cold War. These highway segments were rarely used for aircraft operations, but they were legal emergency landing sites under federal aviation regulations. More importantly, Maria knew the exact locations of these highway segments and the specific approach procedures required to land high-performance aircraft on roadways. The knowledge came from her Blue Angels experience, when the demonstration team had practiced emergency landing procedures on various improvised runways as part of their contingency training. The highway segment east of Phoenix offered the best option, 3 miles of straight, level roadway with minimal overhead obstacles and sufficient width to accommodate F-16 landing operations. But landing 6 aircraft on a highway during a violent thunderstorm would require precision flying and coordination that pushed beyond the limits of normal pilot training. It would require someone with Blue Angels experience. Maria made the decision that would transform her from grocery store employee back into the pilot she had always been. She approached Susan Chin, who was monitoring the emergency broadcasts with growing concern for the trapped pilots. "Susan, I need to use your phone to call Luke Air Force Base," Maria said urgently. "I have information that might help save those pilots." The phone call to Luke Air Force Base was initially met with skepticism and bureaucratic resistance. The duty officer who answered Maria's call was overwhelmed with emergency communications and had no time for what seemed like civilian interference in military operations. "Ma'am, we appreciate your concern, but we have professional air traffic controllers and emergency coordinators handling this situation," the duty officer said dismissively. "Civilian suggestions aren't helpful right now." But Maria's persistence and specific technical knowledge eventually convinced the duty officer to transfer her call to the operations center, where Colonel Brennan was desperately seeking any viable solution to the crisis. When Maria identified herself as a former Blue Angels pilot with specific knowledge of emergency highway landing procedures, Brennan's skepticism quickly gave way to desperate hope. "Rodriguez," Brennan said, recognizing her name from the security files that had led to her termination, "you're the custodian we fired for security concerns. Why should we trust anything you tell us?" "Because those pilots are going to die unless someone helps them land on Interstate 10 east of Phoenix," Maria replied bluntly. "I know the exact procedures required for highway emergency landings, and I can guide them through the approach if you'll patch me through to their flight leader." The radio connection was established within minutes, putting Maria in direct contact with Captain Martinez and her desperate flight of fuel-starved F-16s. The electromagnetic interference made communication difficult, but Maria's calm professionalism and obvious expertise quickly established her credibility with the trapped pilots. "Viper Flight, this is Ghost," Maria said. using her old Blue Angel's call sign without hesitation. I'm going to guide you to an emergency landing site that can handle your entire flight. Follow my instructions exactly, and I'll get you home safely. What followed was the most challenging flying coordination of Maria's career, requiring her to guide 6 aircraft through a precision approach to a highway landing during a violent thunderstorm. Using her intimate knowledge of F-16 performance characteristics and her Blue Angel's experience with formation flying in adverse conditions, Maria provided turn-by-turn navigation instructions that brought the aircraft safely through the storm to the designated highway segment. Reduce airspeed to 180 knots and descend to 2,000 feet above ground level, Maria instructed. You'll see Interstate 10 running east-west beneath the cloud cover. Follow the highway eastbound for approximately 12 miles until you reach the emergency landing zone. The approach required split-second timing and absolute precision as each aircraft lined up for landing on the narrow highway corridor. Maria coordinated the landing sequence, spacing the aircraft to prevent collisions while ensuring that each pilot had adequate runway length for safe touchdown and rollout. Viper 1, you're cleared for landing. Touchdown at the western end of the straight section and roll to a complete stop. Viper 2, maintain 500 feet altitude until Viper 1 is clear of the landing zone. One by one, all 6 F-16 Fighting Falcons touched down safely on the desert highway, their emergency landing coordinated by a woman who had been deemed unsuitable for even basic custodial work just months earlier. The pilots emerged from their aircraft to find themselves on a remote stretch of highway where emergency vehicles were already converging to provide assistance and security. The rescue operation made national news, with media coverage focusing on the miraculous survival of 6 military pilots whose aircraft had been guided to safety by an unidentified air traffic coordinator during impossible weather conditions. The Pentagon's initial press releases credited the successful emergency landing to, quote, professional coordination between base operations and experienced flight crews. But the truth emerged when Captain Martinez insisted on publicly acknowledging the civilian coordinator who had saved her flight. Someone calling herself Ghost provided navigation and landing guidance that was beyond anything we learned in flight school, Martinez told reporters. Without her expertise, we would have crashed when our fuel ran out. She's a hero who deserves recognition. The subsequent investigation into the emergency response revealed Maria's central role in coordinating the rescue operation, and led to embarrassing questions about how someone with such exceptional aviation expertise had been working in a grocery store instead of contributing to military operations. Colonel Brennan found himself defending his efficiency protocols and security procedures to Pentagon investigators, who questioned whether bureaucratic priorities had taken precedence over operational effectiveness. Dr. Patricia Vance, now serving as the FAA's Director of Emergency Response Programs, led the investigation into the highway landing operation and personally interviewed Maria about her background and qualifications. The conversation took place in the same conference room at Luke Air Force Base, where Maria had been interrogated and humiliated during her termination process. Commander Rodriguez, Dr. Vance said, using Maria's former military rank in recognition of her service, your coordination of this emergency operation was flawless. The precision required to land 6 aircraft on a highway during a thunderstorm is something that very few people in the world could have accomplished. The formal recognition that followed included reinstatement of Maria's security clearances, a personal apology from the Secretary of the Air Force for the bureaucratic failures that had wasted her talents, and offers of employment from multiple organizations that recognized the value of her exceptional skills and experience. More importantly, the incident led to comprehensive reforms of military emergency response procedures and civilian military coordination protocols. Maria's case became a catalyst for changes designed to prevent bureaucratic obstacles from interfering with operational effectiveness and to ensure that exceptional talent would be recognized and utilized rather than suppressed. Maria Rodriguez returned to Luke Air Force Base not as a custodian hiding her abilities, but as a senior consultant for emergency aviation operations, leading training programs that prepared pilots for the kind of crisis that had nearly claimed 6 lives during that August thunderstorm. Her expertise was finally being used to its full potential, contributing to aviation safety and saving lives in exactly the way she had always intended. The woman who had once cleaned F-16 hangars while hiding her identity as a former Blue Angels pilot had proven that excellence cannot be permanently grounded by those who fail to recognize it. Her skills had been tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable, and she had demonstrated that true professionals find ways to serve others regardless of the obstacles placed in their path. Standing in the same hangar where she had once mopped floors in anonymity, Maria Rodriguez looked up at the F-16 Fighting Falcons that she now helped train pilots to fly safely. The aircraft were no longer symbols of lost dreams, but reminders of the lives she had saved and the purpose she had reclaimed through her refusal to let bureaucratic betrayal define her worth. The aftermath of the highway landing operation revealed layers of institutional failure that extended far beyond Maria's personal situation. Congressional hearings were convened to investigate how the military's most advanced fighter aircraft had been saved not by official emergency protocols, but by a grocery store employee whose expertise had been systematically ignored and suppressed by the very organization that should have valued it most. Senator Elizabeth Hawthorne, chair of the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Military Readiness, summoned Colonel Brennan to testify about the sequence of decisions that had led to Maria's dismissal and the near loss of 6 F-16s during the storm crisis. The hearing room was packed with media representatives and aviation professionals who had followed the story with growing incredulity. Colonel Brennan, Senator Hawthorne began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades holding military officials accountable. Can you explain to this committee how someone with Commander Rodriguez's qualifications and experience came to be working in a grocery store instead of contributing to our national defense? Brennan's testimony revealed the depth of bureaucratic dysfunction that had characterized his leadership at Luke Air Force Base. His efficiency protocols had prioritized cost reduction and procedural compliance over operational effectiveness, creating a system where exceptional performance was viewed as a threat to standardized operations rather than an asset to be cultivated and utilized. The investigation uncovered email communications between Brennan's office and Pentagon administrators that explicitly discussed the need to eliminate, quote, disruptive influences among civilian contractors who displayed excessive initiative in their work assignments. Maria's case was cited as an example of successful implementation of policies designed to maintain clear boundaries between civilian support staff and military operations. More damaging was the revelation that Dr. Thornton's psychological evaluations had been conducted under contract arrangements that incentivized finding mental health issues among former military personnel working in civilian positions. The evaluation protocols were designed to identify psychological justifications for employment termination, rather than to provide genuine therapeutic assessment or support. Captain Jennifer Hayes' security investigation was similarly exposed as a deliberately constructed case built on manufactured evidence and procedural violations that existed only on paper. The anonymous reports that had triggered the investigation were traced back to Brennan's own administrative staff, who had been instructed to document, quote, suspicious behavior that could justify Maria's removal from base premises. The congressional investigation resulted in Brennan's immediate removal from command and retirement from active duty, along with disciplinary action against the civilian contractors who had participated in the systematic harassment of Maria and other former military personnel. The entire incident became a case study in how bureaucratic incompetence could undermine military readiness and waste human resources that were critical to national security. But the personal vindication, while satisfying, couldn't fully restore what Maria had lost during her years of professional exile. The psychological toll of systematic betrayal and forced anonymity had created scars that formal recognition couldn't completely heal. She had learned to doubt her own judgment and value, internalizing the message that her expertise was somehow dangerous or inappropriate for civilian application. The transition back to professional aviation work required careful therapeutic support and gradual rebuilding of confidence that had been systematically demolished by institutional gaslighting. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a clinical psychologist who specialized in treating former military personnel, worked with Maria to address the complex trauma associated with professional identity destruction and bureaucratic abuse. What you experienced wasn't just employment discrimination, Dr. Martinez explained during one of their sessions. It was a coordinated campaign to convince you that your most valuable qualities were actually character defects. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and deliberate, designed to make you complicit in your own professional destruction. The therapeutic process revealed how deeply Maria had internalized the criticism and restrictions that had been imposed on her work. She had begun to question her own technical judgments and second-guess decisions that would have been automatic during her military career. The constant supervision and documentation requirements had created a state of hypervigilance that made it difficult for her to trust her own expertise. Rebuilding her professional confidence required not just acknowledgement of the institutional failures that had damaged her career, but active demonstration that her skills and judgment remained as sharp as ever. The Federal Aviation Administration offered Maria a position as a senior consultant for emergency response protocols, where she could apply her unique combination of Blue Angel's precision flying experience and real-world crisis management skills. The new role involved developing training programs for civilian and military pilots who might face emergency landing situations similar to the highway operation that had saved the 6 F-16s. Maria's approach combined theoretical knowledge with practical experience, creating simulation exercises that prepared pilots for the split-second decision-making required during catastrophic emergencies. More importantly, the position allowed Maria to mentor younger pilots who struggled with their own transitions between military and civilian aviation careers. She recognized the signs of institutional betrayal and professional identity confusion that she had experienced, and she worked to provide the support and guidance that had been unavailable during her own difficult transition. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a former Navy pilot who had been medically retired after a training accident, became one of Maria's most successful mentoring cases. Chen had been struggling with depression and career uncertainty when she was assigned to Maria's emergency response training program, unsure whether her military experience had any value in civilian aviation. "The hardest part isn't learning new procedures," Chen confided during one of their training sessions. "It's accepting that everything I accomplished in the Navy doesn't seem to matter in the civilian world. I feel like I'm starting over from zero, like my experience was worthless." Maria recognized the emotional devastation in Chen's voice, the same sense of professional worthlessness that had characterized her own transition to civilian employment. "Your experience wasn't worthless," Maria replied firmly. "The problem is that civilian institutions don't always know how to recognize or utilize military expertise. That's their failure, not yours." The mentoring relationship became a model for programs that helped former military pilots navigate the complex transition to civilian careers, while maintaining their sense of professional identity and self-worth. Maria's experience with both the highest levels of military aviation achievement and the lowest points of civilian employment discrimination provided unique insights into the challenges faced by veterans seeking meaningful work. The National Transportation Safety Board appointed Maria to lead a special task force investigating emergency landing procedures and pilot training requirements for catastrophic weather events. The position represented official recognition of her expertise and provided a platform for implementing safety improvements based on lessons learned from the highway landing operation. The task force's final report recommended comprehensive changes to pilot training programs, emergency response protocols, and interagency coordination procedures that could prevent future crises from escalating beyond manageable limits. Maria's technical expertise and crisis management experience were credited with identifying systemic weaknesses that had made the F-16 emergency more dangerous than necessary. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from Captain Rebecca Martinez and the 5 other pilots whose lives Maria had saved during the thunderstorm crisis. They requested permission to attend Maria's official reinstatement ceremony at Luke Air Force Base, where she was formally recognized for her extraordinary service to military aviation and national defense. "Commander Rodriguez didn't just save our lives," Martinez said during the ceremony. "She reminded all of us that excellence can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that true professionals never stop serving others regardless of the obstacles they face." The ceremony took place in Hangar Delta, the same facility where Maria had spent 4 years cleaning aircraft, while hiding her identity as one of the world's most skilled pilots. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present, as she stood before an assembly of military officials and aviation professionals who were finally acknowledging talents that had been present all along. General Patricia Hawkins, now serving as the Air Force Chief of Staff, personally presented Maria with the Distinguished Flying Cross for her role in coordinating the emergency landing operation. "Your actions during the August storm crisis exemplified the highest traditions of military aviation," Hawkins said. "Your willingness to use your exceptional skills to save lives, despite having been treated unjustly by the institution you once served, represents the best of what we aspire to be as military professionals." The recognition ceremony concluded with a flyover by the current Blue Angels demonstration team, their F/A-18 Super Hornets performing the Diamond 360 maneuver that Maria had once executed with the same precision and grace. As the aircraft thundered overhead in perfect formation, Maria felt the phantom sensation of flying that had sustained her through years of professional exile and personal struggle. Standing in the hangar where she had once worked anonymously as a custodian, surrounded by colleagues who now recognized her true worth and capabilities, Maria Rodriguez understood that excellence had indeed found its way back to the sky. The journey had been longer and more difficult than anyone should have to endure, but it had ultimately proven that exceptional talent cannot be permanently suppressed by institutional incompetence or bureaucratic spite. The woman who had cleaned F-16 hangars while hiding her identity as a former Blue Angels pilot had reclaimed her place in the aviation community and ensured that her story would serve as a reminder that true professionals find ways to serve others, regardless of the obstacles placed in their path. Excellence had triumphed over adversity, guided by the steady hands and brilliant mind of a pilot who had never truly stopped flying. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.